everyone. It's Sara and I again on day 3 of the Making Dad Summit. It's June 17th, and our theme again for today is Hope Beyond Infertility. And we are so excited to begin the conversation about building a family with donor sperm. But before we do that, I just want to take this opportunity, and thank Fairfax Cryobank once again for being our sponsor. It is with thanks that we acknowledge them for sponsoring the Making Dad Telesummit, because it's through their generosity that this very important conversation is funded. Fairfax Cryobank is one of the largest sperm banks offering anonymous and ID option sperm donors, as well as storage service for sperm, embryos, and oocytes, which are eggs. You can find more information about Fairfax Cryobank by visiting their website, fairfaxcryobank.com. And thank you so much, Eric, for being with Sara and I. Hello, Sara. I know you're on the phone. Hello, Eric. And we're just going to let Sara introduce you to everyone who's on the line.
Thanks, Kristen. You know, I think this is a good session to just highlight the great work that Fairfax does, in bringing hope to families where, the male factor issues are, they're insurmountable, and really there aren't very many other options. So these, sperm banks are there, and they, create these incredible miracles for family building. So I just want to echo the thanks as we start this really important conversation on donor conceived children. I am really happy to introduce Eric. He is the founder of DI Dad's Yahoo group, which is the biggest community on the internet to support. It's a private community that allows men a safe space to really delve into these issues and talk through and work through their emotions as they're considering building their family with donor sperm. And I think my hat's really off to Eric for creating this space, because I think it's a very emotional issue, and men need a safe place to have these discussions. So I thank you for your work and for joining us today to have this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate joining you guys every year because it is an important topic overall, talking about infertility, and certainly donor conception with creating and raising children via donor conception is not just about the families who are doing the creation, but it's also about the children themselves and their relationships as they grow up to their families in light of their creation stories. So again, thank you very much for allowing me to join in and participate.
So let's kind of, I guess let's start at the beginning, and we could get a little background on you and what inspired you to create the DI Dads group.
Well, my background was I grew up knowing that I had some. I was born with undescended testes, and then when I was a kid back in the '60s, one was lowered surgically, one via drugs. So many men of my generation, who had dealt with these things, knew there was a possibility that their fertility was going to be affected. But it wasn't until before I was going to be married that I actually learned that I was suffered from non-obstructive azoospermia, which basically means there's nothing physically that was creating the creation of sperm. It's just genetically my body doesn't produce it. But I learned a short time before I was to be married that I had this issue, and my then wife and I decided to continue on. Luckily for me that we got married, and then we knew we'd have to address the infertility down the road during our marriage and how we wanted to create children. Eventually, after learning about IVF and ICSI and everything that goes along with that, we were lucky enough to understand that donor sperm was also an option, and we had two beautiful children using a common donor for both of them, an anonymous donor. But it was during that time that I think after my second child was about 2 that I learned of the donor sibling registry and started getting involved with their Yahoo discussion groups that existed at that time, that I realized there was no venue for men to speak. It was, and primarily women were the ones on these sites to begin with, but there were a fair number of men. But there was very few places, if at all, that men can talk among themselves about these issues, and that's how the Yahoo group DI Dads was actually formed. It was actually created by a British gentleman who was a sperm donor himself, and in discussions that he and I were having on one of the other Yahoo groups. So he actually created it, but then he just turned it over to me immediately after he created it. And I just started, trying to publicize it for men that were either considering using donor sperm or people that already had families like myself created using donor sperm, to basically just have a place that men can, shoot the breeze, ask the serious questions, to feel they weren't being judged. And as much as men pride themselves on, being, quote unquote, the stronger gender, quote unquote, a lot of people have that issue, putting that aside, but talking about these issues in public where women are involved, men would clam up. Men would not speak about these issues publicly because the stigma is attached to it and the fear of not being seen as a man, and they needed a venue. And having this group allowed men a safe place where we can discuss among ourselves issues of concern, how it affects our marriage, or how it affects who we see ourselves as men, just as women who have problems, producing eggs and carrying children to term have issues about who they are as women. Men had the same issues on our side. And that's what the group has been over the last, now the group must be we're about 10 years old, I guess, already. I didn't even realize that thinking about it through, because it's a very self-sustaining group. As more men come on, the men that are on the group step up to the plate and start, providing support and answers about how we went through the issues as we decided to grapple with them.
Wow, that's just it like makes my heart sing to just hear that, and to just really honor and have the space for men to be real about these things. In talking with guys and just kind of being out there, I feel like men feel very isolated and not having a place to go, or feeling like they're the only one, or this isn't common. So I feel like a message I want to get out there and have you talk about a little bit is how common this is, and that you really, there are a lot of men that deal with infertility and grapple with these issues.
Yeah, male factor infertility is not as publicly recognized as people assume infertility, wrongly so, is on the woman's side. And I don't know the actual percentages, but it's a fair number of men that have issues with whether it's fertility or, production, or, they may have cancer issues that led to, that they can't produce sperm anymore, that kind of thing. And so it's very much part of the overall discussion dealing with infertility. And it's something that more and more men are coming to terms with, I think, that they have to address. I think too often they go to their doctors and they assume the issue is on their wife's side until they get tested, and then realize, lo and behold, it's actually their production that's not up to the numbers needed for the amount of sperm to create an embryo. And I think it's a shock to most men. When it hits, I think it hits them directly in their who they define themselves as. Are they men? Or, that kind of question comes up in their mind, and the fears that go along with it. I think the greatest issue that happens with donor conception is that once you get to that decision, and it takes a lot, I think, for many people to get the decision to use donor conception, is that, what does that mean for the family? But too often I think people use donor conception as a cure for their infertility, but realistically it's just sidestepping it and creating a family, and there's a whole set of issues that go with it that are just beyond, the mother and father and what their feelings are about their infertile diagnosis, for lack of a better word. I mean, for me, I had written a blog. I don't write it as much as I used to, called Life as Dad, the Donor Insemination Kids, and I used to get a lot of comments from people who, mostly women, whose husbands didn't know where to turn. And so that was part of the genesis also of how the group came about, because there were a lot of men that even when they used donor conception, their families hide it. Very often, it's a hidden, for lack of a better, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but there's such a stigma, I think, still attached to it that most families wouldn't acknowledge it within their families, don't tell their kids, and people don't know that that's how their kids came to be.
Wow.
I think it's because that is such an important statement that you just made about the stigma, that in the pain of it, and then it gets hidden, which causes a whole different, you must, you live this and speak to the gentleman about this, but it causes a whole different kind of burden. So here you have a man who's burdened by a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis, and then the shame, and then the burden of hiding that, or feeling that you are going to be judged because of that. And I think what you said at the beginning, Eric, I'm piping in now because I've been quiet for a little bit, is that, how you made the analogy of the biological issue of not being able to produce eggs, or the biological issue of not being able to carry a baby to term, is the mirror image for a man not producing sperm or having a low count or morphology. So if you're talking about the mirror image of what the women are feeling, and what we learned last year through your wisdom and sharing, is that the emotional component is being almost ping pong back and forth, but there's still such a great disturbance, I think, for men to come out and talk about that part. So what you just did was so profound, because you made the analogy that is pretty clear.
I think
from a medical point of view.
It's very, looking back on it now, all the years, and speaking to so many people as I have over the years, and even the Yahoo group, I admit I'm not as involved day to day as I used to be, because we have a really great group of guys on there that act as moderators and help new people when they come onto the site. That we see it with every new group of men or men that join the group of, they go through a certain pattern of how they react. It's first shock, it's first depression, first, examining who you are as an individual in relation to your spouse or your partner. And there are very graduated steps that it takes people to get to accept the infertility or to accept the position they're in before they can even consider donor conception and all the questions that go along with that. We've seen from both sides of the marriage, how women and men will react to each other and support each other is so important, because it is, like you said, just a mirroring of the conditions that may exist on the other side, that I think as long as people look at it from how they would react, they can better relate to how their spouse is feeling. I think the greatest pain that it comes down to for a man is that if the issue is more centered on the woman's physiology, about whether the woman is fertile or able to carry a child, the man is there fully as support. But the man doesn't feel, they're there to support their spouse, but they don't always feel the same type of pain that a woman feels, because just the way we have different emotional makeups, how we deal with it. But I think when a man has infertility issues, because of the way that it's still the woman that has to carry the child, all of a sudden the woman's going to feel all the pain and all the pressure as well, because once she's impregnated with the sperm, she has to go through all the same IVF stuff, all the same medical things, going to their reproductive endocrinologist in the morning to be measured and to be all the stuff that leads up to it. So the woman, it's not like, you solve what you're doing for the man and then it's done. The woman still has to go through all the other issues that a woman going through infertility has to deal with and all the emotions to it. So as a man, you feel like you've imposed your infertility on your wife or your spouse or your partner, and so then the man feels doubly guilty because you now see your spouse struggling with it to get pregnant when the issue was physiologically yours. And a lot of men, it's a very, very hard thing for them to deal with that, and it's a big, big stressor on marriages, as you know, I'm sure you've seen in other segments and dealt with that. Infertility is a really, really probably one of the biggest stressors that a marriage can withstand, if you can. And so I think for men, when we get together and we speak about these issues, there's a lot of guilt, you know, even beyond the stigma issues about how to address coming to terms with it and what it means and how you come together. So there's a lot of issues that go on.
Do you have, over the years, I mean, you've been doing this for 10 years now, and you've seen the cycle of people walking through these emotions, have you seen strategies that are effective, that are healthy, or that can help a person walk through that, you know, I just think of the men that get hit with this, and then they're in that place of hopeless or guilt, like you said, and just
the biggest strategy is opening up. I mean, they can't isolate themselves, and I think that's the biggest mistake that, you know, maybe not my generation, but certainly in the 10 to 20 years before, because donor conception is certainly not a new concept and has been used for God knows how many generations out there. The biggest mistake is isolating yourself. I think the more you can talk about it, certainly with your spouse, I think the men that communicate better with their spouses are the ones that I think that process it a lot faster, that can process it deeper and have a deeper appreciation for what's going on. The men that are very, I hate to use the phrase emotionally stunted, but the men who have a hard time communicating, those are the ones that stumble more. Those are the ones that you see more of the fights and the disagreements and not being on the same page as their spouses. I think the more spouses can discuss what's going on and open up about their true feelings, whether it's just one-on-one or it's part of a support group in person or a support group online, the more I think the men can open up about their feelings and address what are their fears for every step along the way, those men seem to handle it better. Those men seem to come through with it. Some of the pain never goes away. Some of the fears can never exactly go away, but at least you understand them better. And I think it all comes down to communication. I mean, I think groups like the Donor Conception Network in the United Kingdom have great support systems where they have a lot of in-person meetings. I think those, from what I understand dealing with those folks over the years, that's helped a lot of their the husbands and men in their programs. I think here it's been, we don't have as many programs like that. Certainly the Donor Sibling Registry has a lot of things where people can talk, but I think, you know, here it's been this group, I think, that's helped a lot of men if they can find us, and if they find us, because the guys don't like me publicizing it too much. I've wanted to create a Facebook page. I've wanted to create this, but they're fearful that a lot of cranks will try to join and that kind of thing. So most people have found us organically through, you know, through summits like yours. But I think, again, getting back to your question, I think the strategy for most men is if they can communicate their feelings more, certainly at least with their spouses. If nowhere else, they have to be able to be open with their spouses about what their concerns and fears are. If they can't do that, I don't want to say they're doomed, but they're starting from at least 3 steps back. So it really comes down to communication.
So, Eric, what is so profound about that is that, you know, us humans' initial reaction is to close ourselves, right? You know, to go in the cave, the man cave maybe, and isolate and try to, you know, go into that place and relieve it yourself, you know, dissipate the pain. And what you just said is so profound. And what I do within, you know, my coaching sessions with couples is really ask the question, because there's an awareness that first you're in this fight or flight situation, that you get this diagnosis and you get this news, and then you so eloquently said, you know, you get the fear and you get the pain, and that is, those emotions are so dense that you physically shut down or you emotionally shut down, right?
Yep.
And so the great question to bring awareness to yourself is just to simply ask yourself, am I open and closed? Am I open or shut right now? And then I'm feeling blank and I need blank. And what I found I would love to hear your insights about this or your thoughts about this, is that for that man who is really, how you just said, starting 3 steps behind or starting in a more difficult or challenging position of not being able to communicate what they're feeling, what do you need to do that in maybe an indirect way that you feel that you can, put your toe into sharing in a way that's safe for you? Because part of this whole conversation about infertility is really about a basic need for security and safety. And that's right in our base root chakra, which is right where all our organs are. And so what you really are doing and what you really are saying is, how are you managing your safety? How do you feel safe? And for men, I can't answer that question, but I know what has been profound for couples that I have the honor of working with is really creating just a journal so that a man and a woman can indirectly communicate about this. And it's not like, it's almost like passing notes in grammar school, know. And if you're so in tune with your spouse, you will know what questions to ask, even if you do check yes or no. That's a way of creating an opening to get it out. And so, and now with this technology, even text. So I wonder how you feel about that, like the indirect communication.
I think it's actually a very cool idea. I mean, it's sort of, when I started my blog, I started it more for myself. I didn't realize, at that time when I started blogging so many years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I didn't really expect the response that I got. So I was sort of keeping that journal for myself. How much my wife at that time was reading it, I learned over time what she was reading, because then I would start getting comments at the house. So it's sort of like, what you're saying about this journal is like passing notes back and forth. So I think that's a wonderful, wonderful idea. It doesn't have to be a public on the internet as my blog was, but if keeping a composition book that you can write your feelings down, I think it is a great way for spouses to start the discussion. If they don't feel comfortable face-to-face discussing it, that at least gives the man an avenue to write down what their thoughts are. And even if you prompt them with certain questions, because there were certain questions I could write out that I've seen so many men ask themselves, or once they knew the question they started thinking about the answers, that giving the men the ability to write something down, like you're saying, in an indirect method, I think is a great way to do it.
So can you give us 2 of those questions for a spouse or partner listening that would prompt an opening? So the intent, right, if you know how I live with the state of intention, right, setting your intention for the day. So if the intention is to keep the opening, right, even if there's just a little speck of opening, and what would those be if your wife or your partner's intent is to keep it open?
Well, I think it comes down to is that you want to keep it open, like you said, and you want to reassure. So I think any question that a woman, a spouse, is going to ask their husband is to reassure them that they still love them and still that they're still their husband, that they're nothing less. And so I don't know the exact questions, but you want to be able to say, look, I'm with you no matter what. And whatever that is, what do you think you need from me to help you open up? Or what do my spouse, we found out 6 months before we were to be married, and she let me know unequivocally that no matter what, she was going to stay with me and wanted to get married, even though I gave her the out to call off the engagement right then and there. So I think the idea is for a spouse to be able to say to their husband or partner, starting off the question, just reassuring them that I'm here and that I'm listening. Even though I may not be in the room with you when you read this, I'm here for you, and just, you don't have to worry about me going anywhere. I'm not leaving you over this. And so then I think the question to ask is that, what is your fear? If your fear is I'm going to think of you less as a man, I'm telling you I don't. And maybe to start off something like that.
That is perfect. What is your fear? And you know what? In my book, Love and Infertility, I talked about this because way back when we were going through this, and I was married at the time. It was so helpful for me just to, and we would share, and the moment that you can reconnect to that spark. And I think within these moments of closing yourself off for fear or for feeling unworthy, because that's, I think, what we're skating around is the sense of unworthiness, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you uplift each other and make each other feel open and worthy, no matter if your body is not responding in kind the way that you're hoping? And it really is to document that moment that you knew, or any of those nostalgic moments that you could get that loving feeling back. Because I think that the more your brain and your body can connect to those memories in this fight or flight response, it's a form of changing the chemical reaction in your brain, because you're remembering that your whole body will remember that feeling.
Yes, I mean, couples always have to feel that they're part of a couple, that they're not in it alone. And like I said, you can't close off. As long as you know you're part of a couple. I mean, we've all been to the infertility conferences, whatever organization is, and there are times when you walk around and you see a young couple and you could say, okay, they're scared, but you can still see the spark between them.
Right.
And it's the couples that are worn down after, God knows how many cycles you've been through, that they're the ones that need to be reminded as to they're there together with each other and not let the being worn down take over. It can't win. And so I think in this state, if it's, a man's infertility, the best thing their spouse can do is just remind them that they're there together to keep that kind of spark going on.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it's incredible. This is really, really great conversation. And, I hear a lot of the same things that when we talk to Imagine It about their situation, being echoed, of being able to try the indirect communication. Talking to your wife is the most important thing. Maintaining that us against the world kind of mentality, like we're a team and we're gonna take whatever the world brings us. I was wondering, so, if you get to that place, you've kind of reached acceptance, or you've reached a good state with your partner, and you've accepted the infertility, and you're still thinking, we want to have a family, we want to be parents, aside from our infertility, and now the world of possibility opens up. There's donors, there's surrogates. There's adoption. There's embryos. How do you even begin the process of trying to figure out what's the right path?
I think you have to decide what you're comfortable with, and now looking back on it, the benefit of hindsight is that what do you want for the child? When I was a kid in the 60s and early 70s, I remember the kids who were adopted at that time. There was still a stigma at that time. I mean, thankfully, that's mostly gone from what I see today in the schools with my kids. But at that time, there was still, that kind of stigma a little bit attached to it. I think it comes down to is what, if the couple is doing their research, is what do they want for their family? How open are they going to be with their family? How open are they going to be with the child themselves and their community? And I think that'll help them guide which path is the right one for them, whether it's donor conception or adoption, what have you. They need to be able to answer the questions as who do they see themselves as parents, what their parenting style might be with the child, and whether they want to be open or whether they're comfortable keeping something as a secret. And I am, as we've spoken in the past, I am a big believer in openness and informing the children of their donor conception story. And I can spend hours just discussing that. But I think for a couple just starting out, they need to think of what their expectations are, how they want to live. I mean, if they're going to go for donor and they're not going to tell people, there are going to be questions that come up over time or comments made over time. Oh, he looks so much like you or she looks so much like you. That how are you going to react to questions like that if you haven't been open about the story? Is that going to be something that's going to dig into you continually through the child's life, that you hopefully don't resent the child and don't resent your decisions? So you need to be able to answer the questions about how life, you want to live it, and that'll help guide you as to whether you want open donor, closed donor, donor release programs. There's all sorts of different kind of donor arrangements that are out there that if that's the choice you make, how are you going to live your lives, and what is your life going to be with relation to the child? And in the end, once you create the child, as opposed to just going through IVF and a couple, luckily then using their own biological sperm and biological eggs, the conception story is done. You were made via IVF. You're here today. I'm your mommy. I'm your daddy. But with donor conception, the issues don't stop after the birth of the child. There are a lot of other issues that go on, and how you relate to yourselves as a family unit and how the child will see themselves down the road. And so you need to think of those issues when you start thinking of the next steps. And it's very scary taking the next steps. The first time I think a man will look at like Fairfax or one of the other cryobanks out there, it's a very scary thing because it's just staring you in the face. I'm replaceable. And those are part of the fears and the issues that men deal with. But here it is. In a catalog, I can order, your spouse can order online all she needs to create a baby. And so those are issues. Can a guy deal with that? Does he want to be part of the process of choosing the donor? Does he turn over the process to her? So there are all sorts of questions about what that guy's involvement is going to be, or that couple involvement, and how they work with each other to, make those decisions and make the choices they need to make, that a couple has to address together, and that the man has to be able to process and to be able to accept and to be able to work his way through, and however he deals with those issues. So it's a very multi-layered question, and I apologize if I've gone off in 12 different directions.
No, it's incredible. I think this is a good opportunity to pull out that little handy-dandy notebook, as those questions can get really charged, of just like, okay, let's list out what the questions are and start tackling them here in a way that we have each our own space. If it's too emotional or sometimes you get a question like that and your wheels, your hourglass is turning, and you're looking at your spouse and you're just like, my hourglass.
Oh, it's overwhelming.
You know what you did though, Eric, is that so when you enter in a situation like that, you really don't know the questions that you should be asking. So you have a newbie, so that's what I call him, a brand newbie, maybe just receiving this diagnosis, and then mapping out the plan of how it's going to be and what's going to look like. And what you keep doing is creating questions that will spur the answer. And I can feel it even just listening to you. Of course it brings you, our journey is right under our skin, right? It just brings you right back to those moments. That it's overwhelming. Like my eyes started spinning. Like, oh my God, I remember that. Like, just the sense of what do we do? And so part of me is loving what you're saying, is because if you don't know, you don't know, right? And
that's where the research.
Right, and what you just did though too is gave the questions, and the one that is so. How do you want to live your life? And that's profound about the whole umbrella of your life, right? Not just about being parents. That's a question that opens up awareness throughout your whole fabric of your creating your life. How do you want to live your life? And then you go from there. But what is so, and to speak to that, maybe sense of confusion or isolation or overwhelm, is that what is so amazing now, 10 years later, because here you are saying you started your Yahoo group 10 years ago. 10 years now into this field, there's so many choices. And within the so many choices, there's so much support. So I'm hoping by what you just shared with all the what I know now that I wish I knew then, because that's what you just did, rattled it all out. that it's empowering, because it and embracing for a moment those feelings of being overwhelmed and confused, because through that comes a light of empowerment. And so your conception story, that's what you really said. How will it relate to the child? And how will you live your life as a family? If I had to boil it down to three things that you said, how do you want to live your life? How will it relate to the children? And what is your conception story? So that is right there, bing, bang, boom, very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in my mind, look, my job at this point, now that the kids are here and they're becoming young adults, is my job is just to help them. My job is to, if they have questions about their story, because my pain is, my pain at this point. If it was still painful, I mean, I would have to deal with the fact that if my kids at this age decided they're going to go out and find their donor and they found them, then they determine for themselves if they want to start a relationship with the donor and whatever that may be, and I'd have to deal with that and process it. I mean, as I said before, if we're a couple with all the pain that a couple would have to do if they go through IVF and all the infertility, once they have their kids, the story's done as far as the conception, because there's no additional questions that need to be asked other than, if God forbid something happened that, was bad during the birth of the kid or whatever. But the kid is here and, it's his and hers, and they don't have to worry about it anymore. My goal now is looking at it from the perspective of my kids and what questions they have, what pain they may or may not have. So when I look at kids out there like Ryan Kramer, who helped found Donor Sibling Registry with his mother, this is a kid that kept asking questions and did something not only to empower himself, but to empower other kids like himself. And those donor-conceived individuals have to live with this issue, and they're the ones that are going to push the legislation further down the road, whether it should be only, anonymous donors have been now outlawed in many English-speaking nations. I mean, you cannot have anonymous donors anymore in Australia, in the United Kingdom, and Canada. That it's due to the efforts of these donor-conceived individuals who their parents got through the infertility by using donor conception, but the parents created children that have many, many questions. So, like I said, and like you've recaptured, is that when you start your journey as a couple, you have to think, what is our life going to be? What is our family going to be? And how open we want to be? And because it affects so much going forward, it affects how these children look at themselves and how they will then conduct their own lives. So it goes beyond me just as a dad at that point. It has to look forward.
Well, you know what? My friend Davina Freghauser from Fertility was in Reach. When we work together, we really talk about creating healthy families. And that's what you're talking about right now, Eric. You're talking about creating a healthy family. So at the beginning, it's creating life, right, and creating a baby, creating another family member. And right now, what you're saying through the process of how you created your family, it's really about your focus and your awareness being on creating the health of your family, which is so grown up. And wouldn't it be a wonderful place if regardless of how the family was created, that's the foremost intention, keeping the family healthy. So
exactly. It's what the focus has to be down the road.
So I think it's really a beautiful thing the way you're putting this and thinking, okay, I have my own issues, and now I have to, if I'm going to really go after this, I really need to think about the kids. I think that could be a place of very large uncertainty and perhaps fear also. I don't know what I'm like as a parent, and I don't know what my kids are going to need, and how can I predict what kind of questions to ask? And maybe it would be useful. You have kids that are 13, and you're starting to deal with kind of the adolescent stuff, and like you have years of experience in parenthood. Can you reflect a little bit on what are the major things that come up, what are some of the things you can prepare for or should think about as you're starting this thought process, if you're being thoughtful?
Meaning that your question being that as a parent now of teens or tweens, it's like looking back on how I would, after the kids were conceived and after they were born, about how do I share their story with them?
Things like that. Like when should you, and what's
I think a lot of it, there are a lot of really good books written as storybooks, and I think most families have used those books to start the conversation, because there are plenty of books about, I came from mommy, or where did babies come from, and then it goes from there as far as saying, introducing kids to the story of that, either mommy or daddy needed a little bit of help, and so you may not introduce it that there's a third person involved, because that may scare the child. It depends on, that everyone knows their children, how fast or slow perhaps to tell a story, but the idea of introducing certain terms and certain concepts to children. And my children knew, God knows how much earlier, how babies were born than kids in their school. And when, fine, they may not have understood what sex was, but they understood a sperm and an egg, because we always used the real terms. We never wanted to use euphemisms. So plenty of families use words like the seed and the egg, and we just went straight for the regular words, which was a little shocking to some of their classmates' parents when it came out. But for us, it was always just being very open. And my son knew since he was 2 years old, because we would start telling him the story. His sister was born when he was 2, so she's literally heard it since the day she was born. But just, beginning to introduce the story slowly. There are several great pamphlets put out, again, by the Donor Conception Network in the UK that are available online that talks about, it's called Talking and Telling, of the series of pamphlets, and it talks about at different ages how you would start the conversation, of letting kids know. It's some families don't tell their children until they're adults, and usually the father has passed away, and then the mother decides to tell their adult child, this long secret, and the kid's like, "What, are you kidding me? You never told me," this kind of thing. So it really depends on the families what they're comfortable doing. But what I've learned is that where the kids have learned about it early, the kids don't fully comprehend it, I think, till they're 7 or 8 years old. But if they've started to hear the terminology beforehand, if families have decided to share it, it becomes more natural for them to understand the story. Everybody, knows I was born from mommy and daddy, if it's a mommy and daddy household, or I was a single mommy household. In our lifetime, you see it through the pictures. When I was a kid, it was slides that would be shown on a carousel in the basement every so often, and you get sick of seeing the slides. It's almost the same thing with telling the kids who are donor conception. They start hearing the story, it's normal, and they don't really think anything of it. It really depends on, everything comes down to identity. There are several times in our lives identity becomes important. Teenagers, marriage, graduating school, parents dying, having our own children, and each of those times people re-examine who they are in relation to the world. And you need to set the stage as to, making children, firming up their identity. If there's questions they have, they will not feel like they're on solid ground. So I think the earlier people can start building that, foundation, sure, there are always going to be more questions. Unless they meet the donor and they can start developing a relationship, there's always going to be questions they're going to have. But I think families have to start thinking about, do I tell the child? At what point do I want to tell the child? Do I want to start the story as just something that happens to other people and then gradually work it away into that it's us? Certainly two mommy households have to, or single mommy households have to address it a hell of a lot sooner, because it comes up. Why don't I have a daddy like my friends at school? Why do we have two mommies where other families have two daddies, or have, a daddy and a mommy? And those children, they have to, they're told earlier because there is no choice. And for the most part, those kids accept it and find they're going to have additional questions down the road, but this is my mommy and this is my other mommy. And for households where it's donor sperm, they don't always know.
Right. I think it's what you hit on is creating normalcy. This is us.
Yep.
And this
exactly.
is us. This is us, and this is who we are. And it's the comfortable comfortability of the sharing. You know, it's so funny that you say that because I giggle because we use the same, you know, anatomically correct terms in my house because of what I do, you know, and Sarah gives out the don't cook your ball shot glass, and my son drinks his milk from that every morning, and my children go to private school, and my daughter took the sperm pen from the bank to school, and you know how the sperm swim up and down the pen? One of the girls goes, "Are those tadpoles?" And she goes, "No, not really." But I'm like, "Don't use that at school," you know what I mean? But for her, it was what we're talking about is it just becomes part of the fabric of who you are, right? And
Yep.
and it's staying open in the communication within yourself first. You have to be okay with your story first before you can help other people and uplift other people within your story. So it always goes back when, of course, this is, you know, where I live, you're self-checking. You know, that are you self-checking yourself? Does this feel okay for me? And working on yourself so that it ripples out into the whole family fabric, right?
Exactly, yes.
So that was so profound. So if you were a listener to our time together, Eric, because we're coming up to a close, what would be that one takeaway that you said, you know, when you reflect back? Do you ever think, oh, God, I wish I just did blank?
I think you can't think of yourself. I think certainly for parents of donor-conceived children, I think the biggest takeaway is that, yes, they want to create a family, and if donor conception is the method they choose, they have to look beyond themselves and to fully understand what donor-conceived individuals, you know, what questions they might have. So I think, you know, looking back on it, maybe we wouldn't have used an anonymous donor had we understood the questions more. Maybe we would have used a donor release program to at least give my children the option of, you know, having at least starting an initial contact and learning who the donor is. But I think for donor-conceived families, it's really just thinking of the children first, putting your infertility and pain second in the grand scheme of life. Certainly you want to, you know, when you're in the midst of it, you want to have that child, you want to have that baby, and you want to have what's quote-unquote a normal family, you know, through birth. I mean, we chose donor conception because we sort of looked at it as half adoption, for lack of a better phrase. And so my wife was able to go through the joy of pregnancy and be normal like other families if that's what we wanted. So again, for this area of the world of dealing with infertility, I think you have to look beyond yourself and think of the children in a way that perhaps you wouldn't if donor conception wasn't a choice.
Wow, that's it. That's beautiful.
That is
and
really
you know
nice.
What? It's something that regardless of how you create your family, if you put your children first, you really are creating the next generation. And that's what we're really talking about, is creating the next generation, right, of healthy individuals. Yeah, that's so powerful. So if someone wanted to connect with you online, how would they do that, Eric?
They can do it a couple of ways. Generally, I've tended to use the username Eric11714. They can find me on Twitter. They can go to the blog, which is still somewhat active. Once in a while, I'll post over there. Life as Dad to Donor Insemination Kids. But the best way is probably either through Twitter, Eric11714, or Eric11714@yahoo.com. And those are probably the best ways. I mean, I have to admit, with the kids entering the tween teenage years, my activity in the donor conception world has dropped off a little bit just to focus on being a parent, and I also deal with dads who are dealing with divorce, so I have to focus on those issues a little bit more. But my kids know their story enough that if they have questions, they can ask me. I'm lucky my kids grew up in New York City. As I've said in the past, my son was in kindergarten through 5th grade with 2 other boys in his class, one who was a 2-mommy household, one that was a single mommy household, and then his conception story. So he had 2 other boys. If he ever asked them, I don't know, but these 3 boys shared a bond of donor conception that, he's still good friends with these kids, that they have their own built-in support network since the kindergarten age. Being in New York, they have that ability. I mean, for people around the country, dads, moms, it's usually turning to the internet these days and seeing who you can connect with that way. So if people want to reach me, they can usually just search on Eric Schwartzman Infertility or that username 11714, and they can usually find me.
That's great. And you know what else? It's all under the summit information under your bio.
Great.
And they can land back on the summit page. So, thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your time and your wisdom. And Sara, I love hanging with you. Okay, have a great rest of the day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.